Hello, I'm Malcolm Hazlitt. As a teenager, he won a scholarship to attend the Royal Military College Duntroon and, while there, completed a Bachelor of Arts at the University of New South Wales and a Master of Arts in History with a focus on Australia's relationship with the United States of America and Southeast Asia. He was awarded the Barron Partners Prize in Strategic Management and also represented the South Australian House of Assembly seat of Waite from the 1997 election until his retirement in 2018, and was the Minister for Space Industries and Minister for Health Industries in South Australian Parliament until 2018. And he's here to explain the complexity of the Indo-Pacific region so we can better understand what's happening in today's world. He's Martin Hamilton-Smith, and he's next on OurTime. And he's here right beside me. He's Martin Hamilton-Smith. Martin, welcome.
Great to be with you, Malcolm.
It's nice to be with you too, Martin, because nothing like an ex-politician to speak the truth. And I've known you for a long time and you've always spoken to me the truth. And the world is a bit confused in Australia at the moment because of what's happened with the nuclear subs and are we in danger from China and all of those sorts of problems that people are being fed via the media. So it's really nice to talk to somebody who can give some light on the subject, but can we just talk about your back history and why you know so much about these things?
Well, I'm as concerned as all Australians about what's going on, the change that's occurring, but my vision of it is from the perspective of a soldier.
Yeah.
For 24 years, I was in Army Special Forces.
So when did, now your mum's sitting in the studio over there, Barbara, and I've known your mum for a long time, and her policy of exposing her family to understanding how to speak well by going to elocution classes.
That's right.
And her upbringing of you, was her upbringing of you, did it set you on the path that you've actually taken in life?
Yes, it was a pretty strong example. When you find yourself a single mother with 6 children in the early 60s, having to manage on your own, you're not a fading lily. So it was a superb parenting example for a young person like me to follow. And there were 3 girls and 3 boys, and we just sort of had to survive really, and had to make it. And
so, what attracted you to the armed forces?
Well, I was one of these rare people who, at the age of 12 or 13, decided what I wanted to do and then went and did it. I wanted to be an army officer.
Right.
I think my grandfather probably had a big influence on me. He was
Oh,
a rat
okay.
of Tobruk,
Right.
New Guinea, World War II.
Yep.
His mates, and we had friends that were in the army, and I just decided at a very early age that was for me. And won a scholarship to go to Duntroon, became an officer in the army, went to the infantry, served in an infantry battalion. 22-year-old in the jungles of Malaysia, commanding a platoon of 36 people. Half of them were Vietnam veterans. They were older and more experienced than me. Others were younger, but and then I got involved in SAS and Special Forces. I was our first counter-terrorist team commander in SAS in 1980. I later, as a colonel, commanded our peacekeepers in Egypt in the early days of the problems in the Middle East.
And that's fascinating. We've spoken about this before on this program.
So I spent those years of my life thinking about who might attack Australia and how we might defend ourselves, and going and actually getting involved in that nitty-gritty work. So, and then later on found myself in politics, ironically as ultimately the Minister for Investment and Trade, going to nations throughout the world, but particularly Southeast Asia, including China, and finding wonderful people, great opportunities, and everyone was Australia's friend. With whom we wanted to do business. So I've had this unique perspective of trying to work out what could go wrong for Australia and how we might defend ourselves from that, and at the same time looking at all the opportunities before Australia and how we might make the most of them.
It's a
and
glass
there are some
half
conflicts
full.
in that. There are some conflicts in that
but
conversation.
It's a glass half full and a glass half empty
Indeed it is.
attitude, isn't it?
And a lot of that's determined by your perspective of what you see.
And what we're fed.
Correct.
In information.
And what we're fed. is very different, for example, to what the Chinese people are fed, or the Russian people are fed, or in any country.
As we've talked before, the issues in the Middle East are really so historically long, it's almost frightening.
Well, it is, and yet we've had quite a few wars there. When I was serving in Egypt, I was walking over the ground that the first AIF had trampled as it swept the Ottomans out of the Middle East, and as part of the post-Gallipoli, Middle East operations constituted in World War I. In World War II, we were back there again. Now we've been there for until recently for nearly 20 years. Iraq, Afghanistan. 41 of our young men died there, and hundreds more have been injured, and thousands have come back, deeply moved and affected by their experience.
Which we're now recognising and understanding that this post-traumatic stress syndrome is actually a really serious issue.
Well, it's very real, and you look at the terrible circumstances surrounding our exit from Kabul, which Australians endured just recently, and left us all scratching our heads saying, how did we get into this in the first place?
Well, that's exactly right. You just think, well, why did this happen? Didn't they understand we were trying to save them?
Well, we look, I was involved in counter-terrorism for most of my time in the Army, and I understand perfectly why we went in, and I think it was for the right reasons. We saw what had happened on September 11, 2001. We saw what happened in Bali. There were people out there that wanted to kill us and destroy our way of life, and we went into Afghanistan to ensure that Afghanistan was never again used as a base for terrorists to attack Western democracies and our culture and our way of life. And that was a worthy cause. And it took about a year. It was remarkably successful. We swept the Taliban and ISIS out of Afghanistan, and then for some mysterious reason, we decided to stick around for the next 19 years and try to turn Afghanistan into a peace and freedom-loving democracy.
Yes.
Without really asking the Afghan people if that's what they wanted.
They wanted it.
Or giving much thought to how that might work. And what we've now realised as a consequence of the exit from Kabul, it didn't work well. And in fact, we're right back to where we started, it seems, 20 years ago.
Except they're really doing it to each other now.
Well, they are, but there's also a message in that, and that is before you go foraying into these countries thinking that you have all the solutions and imposing solutions upon them and trying to turn them into an image of yourself or something you'd like them to be, it's a very good idea to talk to them first and to understand the ethnic, the religious and the cultural differences in those countries so that you understand how they tick.
It makes me think, though, that the people making the decisions to do those things, it's almost like they've never travelled to understand anything else. When you travel, when you go to a different country or a different culture, the food is different, the way people dress is different. Surely these are indicators that, this is a different way of thinking to the way that we may have been brought up to think.
Yes, and all of us can see that, of course. It's how we deal with those.
But do we see it, Martin, or are we so sort of what's the word? Are we so, I suppose the colloquial term would be up ourselves to believe that everyone should be like we?
Well, that's in the eye and the mind of the beholder.
The beholder, yes.
Some will think so.
But
some
is that
won't.
the mistake that we're making? Do you think it's?
Well, we've nations have always made mistakes. I mean, let's just cast the line back. We went to Vietnam, and a story unfolded. And as it turned out, I think we might have underestimated the resolve of the Vietnamese people to have their own nation as one. And in the end, it ended poorly. And the courageous effort of our troops and the courageous effort of our nation, really trying to fight the war we fought, ultimately failed, and we lost. And arguably, we did the same thing. We perhaps went into something without fully understanding the complexities of the country and the differences and the cultural, political and social and dynamics of Vietnam. And yet we repeated the exercise in Afghanistan. But the two mistakes, if you like, are strikingly similar, and that is not being able to put ourselves in the shoes of those people we were trying to help and better understand the world as they saw it. instead seeing the world as we saw it, or
Yes.
as we'd like to see it,
As we'd
and
like
trying
to
to
see
remake it in our own
image
or way.
Well, yeah.
And of course, good luck with that. It often doesn't work.
Well, you don't always share the same views as your next door neighbour. Let's be honest, over the back fence.
Well, it doesn't say anything negative about the quality of the ideals, what we were trying to do, and certainly, you know, the brave young men and women that we sent off to both those conflicts, Vietnam and Afghanistan, of whom we should be forever proud, did their very best. But there are questions that we must ask ourselves when we enter these ventures to ensure they don't turn into disasters. And you could only look at what happened in Kabul.
Well, when
see
is
it as a disaster.
staying too long?
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And you know, really, everyone is different, and be careful about who you try to help and how you try to help them, and understand your enemy, but also understand your friends, because you can be encouraged to do things and find out later on down the track that perhaps you're a little too eager to please. So Australia needs to act with its eyes wide open and think for itself and stand on its own 2 feet in every respect, including the fights and the wars we choose to,
of course,
to
and
go to.
who we partner with as well, I guess.
But also more broadly, you know, just being able to, for example, have a manufacturing industry, being able to be independent of foreign governments and foreign multinationals, being able to stand on our own 2 feet.
Well, we're certainly discovering that now. And look, we'll be back to talk with Martin in just a moment. Our special guest is Martin Hamilton-Smith on this episode of OurTime. Martin, we're just talking about, or leading into talking about, our relationship with China, which everyone is starting to talk about, particularly in the media. And it's having a sort of a worrying concern on so many different levels to us, because some people are talking about a possible war with China, which is sort of at this point a bit silly.
Yes, you'd want to think very carefully about that proposition before you went into it.
I would think so.
And I think it's worth just holding on that point for a moment, because the next war won't be like the last one. We won't be waving goodbye to the soldiers at Circular Quay and welcoming them back 5 years later with a ticker tape parade. World War III might look more like the loss of Australia's communication systems overnight and the closure of our banking system.
Which has already sort of happened.
The failure of our mobile phones, not just for a few hours, but for months. Satellites destroyed, submarine cables cut, no communications, cut off of oil. No one can drive their car, the supermarket shelves are empty, everyone's business is bankrupt.
Mad Max
no one
time.
can feed it. Well, it could look pretty bad without a single shot being fired. And anyone talking about the drums of war, particularly senior public servants or any official, ought to think about explaining to the Australian people what that might look like.
It's a great disservice to society.
They will have an opinion on how readily we ought to leap into that, and how earnestly we might strive to avoid it. I'm for avoiding it. I spent 24 years of my life prepared to put my life on the line to defend the country, and like thousands who I served with, we'll be the first ones to say, pick your fights very carefully.
Well, because things have changed so much, and as you've just pointed out, you know, no internet, no phone, no petrol, and so on. These are the things that are going to stop a country and bring them to their knees.
Well, indeed they are.
Not shooting the population.
Yeah, and the fundamental point is that really, as a nation, you want to get along with the rest of the world. Now, there'll be people that you don't like and governments that you don't like and that are different to you, and it's you know, someone might move in next door to you or across the road that you don't like. You know, they might be a bit of a bully. They might, but you've got to learn to live together.
Yep.
You know, I spent 4 years as the Trade and Investment Minister, for example. I went all around the world leading trade missions, including China. I found a marvellous country, an extraordinary country, full of wonderful people. And there are two conversations going on in Australia. One's about defence and intelligence, and it's really about China as a threat. But there's another huge conversation going on in Australia from the mining community and the business community and the university community and all of the people who love foreign cultures and interactions. Mm-hmm. It's a much more positive story about the opportunities of our relationship with China. And these two conversations need to be balanced together by government and our leaders and given to Australia in equal portion. We don't want to get too swayed one way or the other. Yes, there are always risks in the world, but let's not overreact to those because there are also opportunities in the world. And what I'd like to see is a little bit more diplomacy and a little bit more intelligent thinking and a little bit more balance in the way we approach these issues rather than an excited conversation that gets people upset and creates the wrong impression.
Is that, do you think, more media generated or is it just politicians looking for points, do you think?
Look, I think there are Australians who would genuinely be concerned that when a new power arises in the region, we should be alarmed. I mean, don't forget that the last time we had a large Asian nation being aggressive in the region, it was 1939, 1940 and 1941, and it didn't end well.
No.
So a lot of people understandably get a bit anxious. But you know, these sorts of geostrategic changes happen in the world. Look, prior to World War II, the Americans and the Australians weren't really positioned very far into the Indo-Pacific or around China. It was only a consequence of World War II that we finished up with an American army in Japan and Guam, and and then the Korean War came along, South Korea. The Chinese view of the world would be different to our view of the world.
Of course.
We put yourself in their shoes.
Well, I would see it as a threat in a way because here we are, this wraparound of countries, and there they are just sitting.
Well, if you try and look at the world from a Chinese view by just putting yourself in their shoes for just a moment and just, does it look different? Well, yes, it probably does. And they might well be asking, well, why are all these armies around our shoreline, and why is there all this attention on why we shouldn't be active in our own immediate coastal...
South China Sea, for example.
Their view might be, perhaps, just go a little bit further close to your own homes, thanks. A lot of people wouldn't agree with that. They think, no, we like the way it's been since World War II, but one has to understand it from the Chinese point of view. Before you pick a fight with someone, just make sure you understand how the world looks from their point of view. Because
so the situation in Hong Kong has obviously changed things as well, because people from Hong Kong, some don't want to stay because they don't want to be swallowed by that culture. They want to continue with their own. Do you think that's been a catalyst to?
Yes, that's one of the lightning rods that's caused a lot of public debate and concern. But Hong Kong was always part of China, but 100 years ago it was leased to the British, and of course a different culture and attitude grew in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It was always going to be handed back. It was, and it was always part of China. And the Chinese have decided, since it's part of their country, that they'll now run it their way. Well, okay, we can argue about that. But to them, from their point of view, it's part of China, and you might not like their government, but their government has a view on how China should run, and they've got a sovereign right to do that. We might disagree, but we don't like them telling how to run our country, and they don't like us telling them how to run theirs.
I often think
so it's change.
The day that a spaceship lands from somewhere else, everything's going to change.
Well, that's right.
Suddenly, it won't be like everyone will have completely different protectorate feel for the planet.
It's the same with the issue of Taiwan, and I've been to Taiwan many times, and I must say I love the Taiwanese people, and I sincerely hope things work out well. But the Chinese view of the situation, the relationship they have with Taiwan, is quite different to the one we see. In their view, that's where the other side fled in 1949 during their civil war, and their civil war hasn't ended until, in their opinion, Taiwan comes back into the fold. Now, we don't agree with that. We see the world differently. They see it from their point of view. And
I suppose it's
one
like
needs to be careful about this.
Yes,
we understand their view.
It's like saying, if Kangaroo Island suddenly succeeds from South Australia, are we going to feel that we own them, or do they own themselves?
Yeah.
Well, in very simple terms. And it's ludicrous to say that, but really that's what it is, isn't it?
Yes. Well, one might take the view that it's a matter for the Taiwanese people and the Chinese mainland people to sort out. That's probably the Chinese view. Others would take the view that no, we've got to, go to war, start World War III over defending Taiwan, and there's no right and wrong answer here. But I think we need a national conversation which is a mature debate and a balanced debate, not one and which doesn't lead us into World War III, because I don't think the Australian people will be up for that. What we don't want is an excited bias debate that's all based around, getting people excited and afraid and creating a sense of fear and panic that there's change going on.
National idealism as well for what we think we want in life for this planet.
Yes.
I think it's very easy to convince the public, we're all going to stand together, we're all going to do this and we're going to fight the enemy. And as you say, without knowing what the enemy's views are the other way round.
Yes, well that's right. And look, I think too that it's very important that we exercise diplomacy, commerce, good sense. Yes, we need to be strong, and I've been very supportive of and involved as Defence Industries Minister.
And self-sufficient.
We fought very hard to make sure the submarines were acquired and built here. I'm all for a stronger defence force.
Yeah, hold that thought, because I want to talk to you about that, but we just have to take a quick break.
Sure.
We've got some Chinese medicine to sell. Our special guest is Martin Hamilton-Smith. The burning question, Martin, is do we need submarines to be manufactured here in South Australia?
Well, yes, we do. Firstly, we need the submarines and the strong defence force. It's good the government's spending more on that. It's better in international relations to carry a big stick but talk softly, and that means having a credible defence force. So it's good we're doing these things, but if we don't build and operate these things in Australia, we risk not being able to deploy them in the event of a crisis.
Yes, that makes sense.
It's like a mobile phone. We all have one, but if it doesn't receive its regular updates, soon it stops working. Few of us understand how the phone works, but it's important for us to get our job done.
Essential now.
If your submarines and your aeroplanes are like that, well, and you're dependent on a foreign nation, a foreign government, a foreign multinational to keep them going, well, you haven't got a defence force.
No.
We need to be able to build and operate and sustain these things here, and that's the conversation we need to have.
So we need to have the knowledge here.
Of course we do.
Right from the beginning, not somewhere down the track.
In my view, if you haven't built them and if you haven't put together all of the smart technologies that go into them, well then how do you repair them, whether they're nuclear or not? How do you keep them at sea? How do you keep their weapons and sensors working? That's true with aeroplanes, it's true with vehicles.
Of course.
But the broader conversation is about us as a nation. How come Israel, Sweden, South Korea, Taiwan, these countries, middle powers like us, they don't sit back and wait for foreign governments and foreign multinationals to do these things for them. They have their own industries.
I suppose one of the burning questions a lot of people are asking is, do we need nuclear subs?
Well, we need submarines. I think nuclear submarines are far more capable. They can go a long way, they can stay for a long time, and then they can come back.
But if they were using the other sorts of fuel, obviously they have to be refuelled.
Well, correct. A diesel submarine can travel over a much shorter range and therefore loiter and operate for a far shorter period of time. So nuclear is definitely an advantage. It also sends a signal that we're a serious player on the international stage. I think it's been a remarkable set of news. What worries me though is if these submarines are made overseas and we are dependent on foreign multinationals and foreign governments for not only their construction but also the sustainment and for understanding how they work and being able to keep them at sea during a high level conflict. Well, we're very, very exposed. Not only is that an embarrassment, because countries like Israel, Sweden, Taiwan, they've all been able to do it. Why can't we? But it raises questions about whether we're serious and whether we can keep operating these things. During the Falkland War, the British government said to us, sorry, we can't sustain your Oberon-class submarines, we're a bit busy in the Falklands.
Yes.
So, what happens when something happens, the foreign government, it might be our very good friends, the Americans, just say, look, we're a bit busy, thanks, looking after our own submarines, sorry, we can't help you at the moment.
Well, in simple terms, it's like looking after your own car, isn't it?
But it's also a question for all Australians listening to this program. Are we a nation that can make things? Are we a nation that is proud of our science and our enterprise, our workers and our companies? Or do we just a mine, a farm and a tourist destination?
Yes.
Now those industries are important,
Yeah.
But are we more than that? And for the kids, you know, what sort of a career do they want to have? Do they want to be
all
engineers?
makes perfect sense.
So we need to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
We need to have a can-do attitude, not a,
Absolutely.
oh, it's too hard attitude.
Martin, thank you. It's been great talking with you. We could go on for hours, but we have to go. And we have to go now. We'll see you next time on Our Time. Thanks for your company.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
We can continue to